Something unusual has unfolded in the Arctic, far from cameras and headlines, yet with consequences that could quietly reshape global power for years to come. There were no emergency announcements, no dramatic confrontations, and no visible signs of escalation. But behind closed doors, and through carefully calculated diplomacy, a shift has taken place that has effectively closed off Greenland from unilateral American ambitions. For years, Greenland has been discussed as one of the most strategically valuable territories on Earth. Its position between North America and Europe, its proximity to emerging Arctic sea routes, and its untapped natural resources have made it a focal point for global powers. What once seemed distant and frozen has now become central to future military planning, trade routes, and resource security. As polar ice retreats, the Arctic is no longer a remote frontier, it is becoming a corridor. Shipping lanes that once took weeks can now be crossed in days. Airspace that was once marginal is now vital. In this changing environment, Greenland's location has taken on enormous importance. The United States has long understood this. American military infrastructure has existed in Greenland for decades, and US-led defense planners have consistently viewed the territory as a critical component of northern security. Over time, however, strategic interest gradually transformed into strategic expectation. Within Washington, a belief took hold that Greenland would inevitably fall deeper into the American sphere of influence. The reasoning appeared straightforward. The United States possessed unmatched military power, economic leverage, and long-standing alliances. Denmark, as a smaller European nation, was widely assumed to have limited room to resist American strategic priorities. That assumption became far more visible during Donald Trump's time in office. Trump approached geopolitics through a transactional lens. He spoke openly about assets, value, and control. In that worldview, Greenland was not merely a partner or a territory with its own political identity. It was a strategic asset that could be secured if the price was right. This blunt approach marked a turning point. What might once have been handled quietly through diplomacy suddenly became public conversation. The tone shifted from cooperation to acquisition, and that shift reverberated across Greenland and Denmark alike. For many Greenlanders, the rhetoric felt less like an invitation and more like a claim. Questions began to surface about sovereignty, dignity, and the right to self-determination. Greenland is not uninhabited land. It is home to a people with their own political aspirations, cultural identity, and long-term vision for the future. As outside pressure grew more visible, Greenland's leaders became more vocal. They emphasized that decisions about Greenland's future would be made by Greenlanders themselves. Cooperation was welcome. Control was not. That message found a receptive audience in Copenhagen. Denmark found itself navigating a delicate and potentially destabilizing situation. On one side stood a powerful ally with global reach and clear strategic desires. On the other stood Denmark's responsibility to protect Greenland's autonomy and uphold international norms. The issue was no longer just about Greenland, it was about precedent. If a territory could be openly discussed as something to be taken or purchased, what would that signal to the rest of the world? What would it mean for international law, sovereignty, and the rules-based order? Denmark recognized that standing alone would be risky. So instead of confrontation, it chose alignment. At this moment, Canada quietly entered the picture. Canada has long viewed the Arctic not as a zone of dominance, but as a shared space requiring cooperation and trust. With its own vast northern territories and deep understanding of Arctic governance, Canada understood what was at stake. Rather than challenging the United States directly, Canada pursued a quieter strategy. It strengthened ties with Denmark. It reinforced shared principles of Arctic cooperation. It emphasized peaceful resolution of disputes and mutual respect for sovereignty. This approach culminated in a diplomatic agreement that, while understated, proved decisive. By resolving long-standing Arctic issues and reinforcing cooperation between Canada and Denmark, the agreement sent a clear message. Greenland was no longer exposed as an isolated territory open to external pressure. It was anchored within a cooperative framework that valued consent, stability, and shared governance. There was no confrontation, no accusations, no escalation, but the strategic impact was immediate. From that point forward, any notion of unilateral control over Greenland became politically and diplomatically untenable. The space for pressure disappeared. The room for transactional negotiation closed. For Donald Trump, this represented a fundamental problem. His political and diplomatic style relied heavily on leverage, on unpredictability, on forcing negotiations by reshaping the balance of power. But leverage only works when the other side lacks alternatives. In this case, alignment removed those vulnerabilities. Denmark had support. Greenland had a voice. Canada provided legitimacy and balance. There was no opening to exploit, no pressure point to apply without significant consequences. Military force was never a realistic option. Any attempt to impose control would have fractured alliances, undermined international norms, and triggered widespread backlash. Economic pressure would have damaged relationships far beyond the Arctic. The cost of action far outweighed the benefit in geopolitical terms. That is what it means to have no cards left to play. This moment reflects a broader shift in how power operates in the modern world. Influence is no longer determined solely by size or strength. It is shaped by alignment, legitimacy, and cooperation. The Arctic is no longer an empty chessboard waiting for a dominant player. It is a shared space governed by networks of trust and agreement. The United States remains a major Arctic presence. Its influence has not vanished, but entitlement has been replaced by negotiation, assumption has been replaced by consent. For leaders accustomed to decisive dominance, this feels like loss. But in reality, it is adaptation to a changing global order. No territory changed hands, no flags were raised, no victory was declared, yet the outcome is unmistakable. The door closed quietly. The balance shifted subtly, and the rules changed without confrontation. Canada and Denmark did not defeat the United States. They removed the possibility of domination, and, in doing so, they demonstrated how power now works in the 21st century, not through force, but through alignment. Greenland did not become American. Instead, it became something far more difficult to control.